One of my New Year's resolutions was no more bookish drama, and as of recording, it's February, and here I am wading into the muck already. In my defense, I do think this specific controversy, hot topic issue is one that I haven't adequately covered in the past and actually is quite problematic. Additionally, if you happen to be in my audience right now and you don't think listening to audiobooks counts as reading and you are comfortable saying that on social media, in person, in comments, anywhere publicly basically, unsubscribe to me and never watch anything I do again. Because quite frankly, if you think audiobooks don't count as reading, I don't want you in the community. Historically, I have tried to be very good faith, assume that the person who's saying this sort of thing is ignorant, and I will still cover those one more time in case someone is doing this innocently. But even if this is an innocent mistake of ignorance or misunderstanding, the fact that you would come say that with your full chest makes you sort of like an impulsive, thoughtless person I'm not sure I want in my immediate vicinity. Because what people do in their own reading, what they do and don't count as reading, is none of your flippin' business and affects you in no way, shape, or form. So the fact that you even feel the need to weigh in on it at all, to discredit other people, already kind of just strikes me as wrong and elitist, and just you're starting on the wrong foot with me. Basically, if you're feisty about people counting their DNS as books that they've read, if you're upset about audiobooks, if you're upset about skimming, all of those to me are the same elitist issue, and you need to just be quiet. Focus on your own business, what you're doing, your own reading, okay? Don't be over here looking at what I or other people in the group were doing. If you don't like our analysis, don't listen to it. If you don't like the conversations we start, don't listen to it. You do not have to engage with how people read, and I think possibly you should not engage if you're not interested in having a conversation about what they're saying rather than how they got to the point that they could say those things. If you say listening to an audiobook doesn't count as reading, you sound like an idiot. To me, listening or eye reading is exactly the same thing, but let's go ahead and reverse the argument just for the sake of an example. Let's say that listening to stories is the only valid way to consume them. And that's because the core of storytelling comes from a sacred oral tradition. Passing down knowledge and information via word of mouth with someone else's interpretations, thoughts, and emphasis on it is the height of consuming a story or learning key information, because you're not just alone with plain text words and your own internal thoughts, you're getting additional insight, thoughts, and interpretation from the community around you. Leaving your mind alone with just words is too isolating and doesn't give you a full breadth of experience or interaction with said topic. And while I can acknowledge that visual reading helps reinforce what words look like and how to read on a page, listening to a story helps improve a sharper memory. It encourages a longer attention span. It helps you identify tone and nuance in a person's facial expressions and the way they tell a story that might help you in other conversations and social interactions down the line. It can start a conversation on an alternative person's perspectives. A key part of reading things critically, getting feedback from other people and other points of view in the world around you. And in an increasingly online world where face-to-face interactions, listening to someone talk is all becoming less frequent, and additionally social media is encouraging us to have a shorter attention span so they can throw more things at you, listening to a story, increasing that attention span, picking up on those little verbal cues, all becomes more valuable than potentially reinforcing your ability to visually recognize words. So if you thought this presentation of the argument was dumb, congratulations, you understand what it sounds like when someone tells me eye reading is more valid than listening to the story. And if you found this argument interesting, then hi, hello, and welcome. This is what I mean when I say that listening to an audiobook has value and a unique context that might be different than eye reading, but both of them are different ways to consume a story. If you have the ability to either eye read or listen to a story, I totally recommend you try out both. You do them in tandem, you choose one or the other, you'll recognize pros and cons depending on your media, and it will enhance your own understanding of yourself as well as the information you're taking in. But that rolls me into issue number 2 with this argument. If you think that eye reading is the only kind of reading, you sound ableist as hell. Some people can only listen to a story, and others can only visually read one. It's pretty rude and also a little degrading to imply that one is superior to the other or that the two aren't doing equivalent things when they're literally getting the exact same phrasing in words. And I would challenge you, have you never heard of these two adages? There's more than one way to skin a cat, and work smarter, not harder. If hearing a story is easier for you than using your eyes to read the story, it's the same thing. Work smarter, not harder. There is no inherent value in suffering or working harder for the same result. That's some kind of like social misnomer that's trying to like moralize suffering and hard work in a way that just does not exist here on planet Earth. And no shade to anyone who's really into romantasy or any of the viral book talk books, but most of them are pretty shallow, easy read. If you're reading those with your eyes and then complaining about people who are listening to more complex stories, you just are a hypocrite. So sometimes something that you are reading, somebody else will have to listen to. Sometimes someone who has to listen to harder books is very easy for them to consume something a little bit shorter. All of it is on a scale and a spectrum, and there's a whole bunch of different factors involved, and I don't think it's fair for you to pick one vector and judge someone for that alone. And I do understand that John Green recently brought up this audiobook debate, and he sort of used it as a springboard to talk about the differences between eye reading and listening reading. And there's some nuance of like interpretation, understanding, and processing there that is sort of interesting to discuss. But I think bringing it up as an audio versus visual situation ignores the larger point, because we could all read a book or we could all listen to the book and come up with like completely different interpretations, understanding, and different kinds of like processing power and emphasis. So we really want to talk more about like the individual human mind and how it's interesting that our experiences, the way our brains work, all of that kind of stuff leads us to these different interpretations and experiences with the same material, and stop singling it out being as like an audio situation or a visual situation. All of which rolls me into the other complaint: my reading isn't like your reading. And like, no shit. If we all read and interpreted stuff the same, we wouldn't be here online having these conversations or in our in-person book groups talking about something. We're supposed to be engaged and interested in hearing those conversations, what someone struggled with, which is easier for somebody else. This is what makes reading worth doing and socializing over. But you've got to frame the topic in a better, more interesting way that actually approaches directly what you want to converse about and doesn't have us sidelined in this sort of like ableist, elitist rhetoric of whether or not listening or eye reading is the way to go. So to conclude this little like rant video, it's not even about whether or not audiobook listening or eye reading is considered reading. It's more about mind your own effing business. If you're over here in your corner happy with how you read, what you read, all of that kind of stuff, then just go be happy and talk about those things. Don't go looking over someone's shoulder and seeing how they're reading or what they're reading. It's not really any of your business, okay? If you don't agree with their takes on the book, that's something else entirely. If you have an ethical issue for some reason, that's another thing that you could talk about. But if it's just about how they're doing what they're doing, you need to just let that go. But talk to me in those comments down below. What other nosy things are people doing where they need to just be minding their own business and keeping to their own hobby and preference? And if you got this far and you've got nothing else to say, leave me a magnifying glass in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.